Nice to have you, and thanks to Ian Pace for recommending you to be on this podcast. We had a great chat with him about a variety of topics. But the first thing I want to know a little bit about you. So, your career, your compositions, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Right. Well, thank you so much for having me. Um, so I am originally from Catalonia, from the northeast region of Spain, and I became a composer there, and that was like probably 12 to 13 years ago. That's when I really started composing seriously. Um, I had a friend who lived in Boston, actually, um, who recommended me that I just visit him, a musician as well. So I visited him, and that's when I discovered the New England Conservatory, which was the place where I went to for my undergrad. So I applied there. They gave me a scholarship, and that's how I actually was able to um, study there for my undergrad. Um, After finishing my studies there, I moved to Chicago, where I completed last year my doctorate in music, in composition as well, at Northwestern University, where I did study with Hans Tomala, who is a German composer, and with J. Allen Yim, and also with the late Lee Hyla before he unfortunately passed away. So yeah, that's a little bit about my trajectory, I would say, in terms
Yeah.
of my studies. Yeah.
Well, of course, the big topics will come up in a little bit, but
Right.
compositions. I talked to some of my friends who are composers, and many of them are composing a lot for chamber music. What are some of the problems as a composer to compose for an orchestra, which used to be so popular 100 years ago? Now we're sort of not seeing that so much from young composers. And when I read your bio, you've composed a lot for chamber music, but
Right. That's correct.
I haven't seen too much of the orchestral works.
Oh, I don't have a single piece for orchestra. Well, I mean, actually, I do have one piece, but it's a horrible piece. So, so I don't share it. Um, it's a piece for string orchestra, actually. Well, I think that there are a variety of reasons. Uh, the first one probably has to do with how difficult it is to find opportunities for young composers to write for orchestras. That's one difficulty. The other one is that orchestras, in general, for young composers, they invest very little time in very little rehearsal time, I would
Yes.
say. And depending on what your aesthetic interests are, it may be difficult to write something that can be essentially rehearsed in 45 minutes,
Yeah. Yeah.
put together in 45 minutes, and then you just go on stage and you just play it. Um, that's been one of my issues, for example. Like a lot of my music is, it requires a fair amount of time, I would say, um, because technically it is difficult, but also mentally. I mean, the composer is put, not the composer, sorry, the performer is put under uh, a fair amount of, I would say, information or like data that they have to read and translate into sound. And that requires time, energy. It requires the kind of work that is unfortunately difficult to accomplish in the context of orchestral music today. At least that has been my experience.
Yeah.
So,
Well, let's just get to the letter, which you were a part of. The letter
oh,
that was
that's right.
published by Guardian, and then the response by quite a few professional musicians, and you were a part of it. What prompted the letter from your side, particularly? Why did you feel strongly to respond to the letter?
Right. Well, I mean, so everything started because I remember that Ian posted something on Facebook about the article, about the original article by Charlotte Gill. Um, and I saw immediately how many people were just complaining about it, and they were very upset, and they felt very shocked, by, that a publication like The Guardian would publish something like that. So I just suggested right there on the post, that we could write a letter, that we could actually just, instead of just expressing our discontent on Facebook, perhaps we could just write a letter, sign it, and then become more channel, this issue that we had with the article. So everything started there. So I did this. Then I wrote my first draft, and then we had I just sent it to a couple of people, like Kevin Corson, who's a professor of theory at the University of Michigan, Frank Cox, who is a composer and a cellist, and Ian as well. So I sent a letter to them. They changed a few things. They revised it. Ian then made it much shorter so that it could be published, on The Guardian. And then we just shared it with people. Now, the funny thing is that I don't think we were expecting that we would have over 700, 700 signatories. I mean, that was really, at least on my behalf, it was very unexpected. I thought that we would have maybe that 10 people would be fine. Really, that's what I thought. I was just so that at least some of us, show. But it was interesting to see how immediately a lot of people just jumped on board and they were like, absolutely, I want to be part of this. We didn't even have to contact people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what really is interesting. So that's how it went. Then we sent the letter to The Guardian. It took them a while to accept it for publication. They still asked us to make it even shorter. And they still asked us to just provide 50 less names, I would say.
I see. Okay.
Than the entire list, of course.
Of course. Yeah.
So we had to just shorten the list, which is something that we didn't like doing, because how do you decide who you put on the list?
Yeah.
That's something that you have to think about. But yeah, that's how it went.
Some of the words that were used was tricky language. It's like Latin. What do you have to say about that? You come from a background where you've learned music, and did you have difficulties? What would you say to that particular aspect?
Yeah, that was one of the most problematic sentences of the original article, actually. First of all, because I want to defend Latin. Let's just start here, actually. I mean, the fact that a language is dead or is not spoken doesn't mean that it does not deserve rigorous study.
Yeah.
Especially a language like Latin that has such a massive and strong cultural background, I would say, or that allows us to understand much of many of the ideas that have influenced our current ideas. I think that it's crucial for some people, and particularly scholars, who want to understand better, our past as a society, basically. So that's the first thing, that I didn't like the comparison, because I felt that what's wrong with Latin? That's the very first thing. Yeah. The second one, I would say that Latin is significantly more difficult than standard music notation.
I would say a lot of languages are.
A lot of language. I mean, absolutely. So it's difficult to say, because I actually learned notation in my first. So I started learning notation in my very first music class that I had when I was 5. In Spain, we used to have quite strong public schools, but my parents they put me in this really tiny local school that they taught music as well. So I took music theory and ear training and piano lessons since age 5. That's when I started, and I started learning notation. That was the first thing that I learned, actually. So I remember I remember my first music lesson perfectly. I learned pulse. What is pulse? And I learned quarter notes. And from then on, it just became sort of my alphabet. Yeah. Say, in that sense. So now I'm not trying to generalize and say that everyone should go through my path, my learning path, because I really don't think so. But it's the fact that notation is a means for many people and for us as a society to connect with a huge amount of music in critical ways. So if we do not teach this at an early age, or if we put notation on a secondary level, we are denying access to this music, and this is something that I have a problem with. So this is like the reason that I felt so shocked by the article, that I felt like, why would someone romanticize? That is the word that we use, and I think that it's a perfect word, actually. Why would someone romanticize the inability to read and write music? Something that I still, to this day, I still don't quite understand. Well, I do understand why she made the argument, but it's quite sad that someone would make that argument. So,
learning music is just like, learning a language. You have to start, just like you said, you start at the beginning and you learn basic concepts. Just the same thing with the language. When you start a language, you're not going to just go to a college level class and try to speak about some big historical topics or anything else. Over time it develops, and just like and the music happened the same way. As a composer, I'm sure you use the very advanced notation to better explain the things that you're trying to get out of the music to the performers, and eventually people will get there. Now the next thing I have for you, I want to ask, is Spain and amateur music making and community music making. How's that? Because apparently in UK, from Charles Gill's article, it was quite difficult to join an amateur choir because of sight reading. How is it in Spain? Although I must say that Ian said it's not. Ian Pace said it's not, and I know in the US it's not, because I conduct community orchestras, and I know we accept so many people to just welcome them, and even if they don't play well, we welcome them and we give them the opportunity to play. How is it in Spain?
Right. So Spain doesn't have a strong tradition of choirs, for example. But in the southeast, that is like Valencia area, there is a strong, a very long tradition of wind bands, wind ensembles. And in fact, some of the best, brass players from Spain, they come from that area. Brass players or saxophone players or wind players, basically. So in that sense, it's very common for people to learn how to read music, at an early age, because if you want to be part of a brass band, you have to, or of a wind ensemble, you have to be able to read notation. That's just obvious. But besides that, I would say that, at least in my experience, Spain doesn't have the sort of strong, and very deep music tradition that other countries do, like say France or Germany or even Italy, actually. Spain has a fantastic theater tradition and great literature as well. But musically, it has been always a little bit outside of the traditions that come more from Central Europe, I would say. So now that being said, for example, I was a lot of kids, when they're young, 14, 15, kids are part of rock bands, or they play in bands. That's a very common thing. They learn how to play guitar. They learn how to play bass, or drums. And I was part of a band for a while, and it was interesting because we actually recorded a few albums, and we had a number of fans, and it was interesting to be part of that. But I remember very well because at the time when I believe I was 15 or 16, I was already trained very much in notation. So as much as I had a blast, with my bandmates, it was interesting because none of them could read music. And that would make things significantly more difficult during rehearsals, especially when I would when I would write songs that used meter, for example, that was not just 4/4, or 2/4. I remember trying to write a 5/8 song, and it was just extremely complicated for them to conceptualize the very notion of 5/8.
Yeah.
First of all, because if you listen to the radio, you will find very little music that is in 5/8. That's the first thing. So it's, for a lot of people, it's weird. It's something that comes across as like, what is this? But second of all, it's the lack of self-reflection and critical knowledge that notation allows you to access. So I remember that difficulty of being like, of thinking, I wish that you could read this because it would make things much easier. And I'm not talking about full scores. I'm talking about patterns. I'm talking about being able to write, like one bar, in 5/8, and just say, you're playing like da 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 whatever. That's what I'm talking about. Something like very simple, but so that at least you can have it in front of you and you get a sense of like, oh, this is what I'm trying to do. So that's why I think that even in the context of more popularly oriented traditions, I think it's important to be able to at least, you don't have to be able to read an entire Beethoven symphony, but at least being able to grab a score and just tell, okay, I can read this rhythm, or I can sing this very like simple melody. I think that makes things like really easy then, like really easy. So
you said radio, you said pop music, made me think about a post you had on Facebook where you talked about pop music and commercial pop music.
Oh yes.
I would love to hear that, and I'm sure many people would, because the explanation you gave was absolutely great, and so I want to hear about it.
Well, the thing is that I'm going to say something that I do not usually share, but I am not sure that there is such thing, at least in, I would say, developed, as they call it, developed economies. I'm not so sure if there is such a thing as popular music anymore. What we have for sure is commercial pop music. So what we have is a form of music that is highly formulaic, that follows very simple rhythmic, melodic, harmonic patterns. Even the production. So even when you look at the actual production effects, say delays or reverb, things like that, it is really not that sophisticated. That is the vast majority of music that we have access to, that we easily can access to. So if I turn on the radio right now, that's what I'm probably going to find. When I'm on the car listening to the radio, that's what I will find. If I go to a shopping mall, or if I go to buy groceries, that's what I hear on the background, and that's what we hear like most of the time, right? Now, to be honest, I'm not trying to make a moralistic argument that we should not listen to this music. To be honest, my problem is with lack of diversity. My problem is with the fact that this music has a hegemony, and it has created a cultural hegemony. And this cultural hegemony has to do what is strongly tied to the need for profit of large corporations, so say Universal, Sony, Warner, corporations like that they actually are in the music business because they have been able to monopolize the business, first of all, but second of all, because they can generate some form of profit. So the thing that scares me the most is that when you hear arguments about how we have to learn about popular music, I would say I absolutely agree. But we have to understand what popular music is first. Because otherwise we're falling into false categorizations. So we understand popular music as intrinsically connected to commercial pop music. And I think that is actually not correct. I think that it's not. I think that popular music has nothing to do with commercial pop music. Even actually in terms of prices. I mean, I think about like how much it costs to go to like a Beyonce concert. or to a Coldplay concert, or to a U2 concert,
Yeah.
as opposed to like an experimental music concert
Yeah.
where you pay like $5 or $10 and you're there, you know.
And
like,
sometimes it's free.
and many times. So so if we're talking about accessibility and like popular music, we need to consider economic aspects as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a little bit what I would say about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the diversification. So how can we as musicians and you as an educator and musicians and educators in this field contribute and somehow make it a better place, more diverse place? What can we do for the future generations so they have
Right.
a brighter future, as they say?
Right. That's a good question. What can we do, right? Well, first of all, I think that it's important for us educators, music educators, to show students that there is a ridiculous amount of music out there that they have never heard in their lives. To show them that they can listen to, I don't know, gamelan, for example, or they can listen to Chinese opera, or of course, like raga, and like Hindustani music. To show them that there is, how to put it? It's a tricky thing, but to provide them with a context so that they realize that there are many cultural traditions, many musical traditions that have expressed themselves musically, that because of this really high level of commodification, it's very difficult to access, and it's very difficult to listen to, unless you know about it, or unless like someone has told you about it.
Yeah.
So in that sense, and here's the thing, if we're talking about, for example, say curriculum, like what do you teach in a music theory class? I am all for teaching Hindustani music, for example. I am all for teaching raga, and tat, and like all of these, different kinds of Indian modes. I'm all for teaching different kinds of traditions that were not necessarily, like born in Western Europe.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think that is actually an important thing. But it needs to be done well, and it needs to be done in the same rigor that some of us attempt to teach the notation and the music theory skills that we are more familiar with. That is crucial. I mean, it cannot be just tokenism, It cannot just be like, oh yeah, this exists, and it's very cool, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, if we're doing it, we got to go all the way.
Yeah.
So I was talking to a colleague of mine the other day about this, and the difficulty is, how do you create a diverse curriculum without falling into sharing with students a mere survey? Sort of like, oh, so this is what some people do, this is what some other people do, this is what this country does, that kind of thing, and then end of story. That is not real music education. That is, I don't know what that is. I mean, that sounds like actually consumerism. It sounds like, I'm going to offer you a little bit of that, a little bit of that other thing, but really I'm not teaching you anything.
Yeah.
So the difficulty is, to decide, what do we teach? Why do we teach it? And how far can we go in diversifying the curriculum without falling into providing a very superficial understanding of music? This is really difficult. And this is something that requires a long conversation. Yeah.
Well, something about music being hard, and that's another thing you talked about. How do we go about this? If something is hard, do we just let it go and move on? And what are we supposed to do as musicians if something is hard? What do you recommend? And that's another thing that I read that you talked about, and I would love to get your opinion on record now.
No, of course, yeah. I would say that music, like any art form, if you want to be relatively proficient at it, is difficult.
Yeah.
It's a difficult thing to do unless you are like naturally talented in ways that you barely ever see. It's very difficult, and I would even argue that you may be technically very talented, but that doesn't mean that you have any idea of how music relates to like the rest of the world and to other parts of culture, and human culture. So it's a hard thing to do. That's the first thing. Now, before I answer the question of why or what do we do about this difficulty, I think that we have to address why people like Charlotte Gill, and others, why they seem to be afraid of that difficulty. And I would say that this has to do, again, with the highly reductionistic understanding of music that we have because of this highly commodified musical existence that we have created under global capitalism. I think that this is something to remember here. Like, so, I just think about, or the point that I want to make here is that because of this reductionistic understanding of music, we have assumed that music is some form of entertainment only. And here's the thing, music is a fantastic way, to like entertain people. I mean, and I don't disagree with that. And I don't have any issues with entertainment per se, so I'm not like that much of a hardcore Adorian in that sense, I don't think that entertainment per se is problematic. What I do think is that our understanding of music is primarily based on this notion of entertainment. So any other kind of music that attempts to do something else is immediately considered to be elitist or intellectual or other words that have negative connotations, I would say. Music is difficult and it's just the way it is. And like any art form, if you want to treat it seriously and if you want to be able to understand the wide diversity of different types of music that humans have created and that humans can still create, you have to acknowledge that this will take a significant amount of time and energy, thinking, and rigor and discipline. If you're not willing to do that, then I don't know what to say. Then we're just going to fall into the creation of, again, like forms of music that are quite simplistic and quite superficial. Yeah. So, and again, this is not to say, that I have a crusade against commercial pop music. I really don't. I mean, my problem is that, I listen to sometimes to commercial pop music. But this is the thing, I have been trained musically and I have developed a certain degree of critique, of critical abilities, I would say, that allow me to discover and find out other types of music. Yeah. So I am not constrained by the cultural hegemony, I would say, of commercial pop music. And like me, many other people. Yeah. But unless you have developed that, you will see music as what's on the radio. Music becomes just this thing. And that's it, So I like, for example, in that regard, I like to talk about Pythagoras, and I like to talk about radically different views of music from what we have today. Music as a means to explain mathematical relations, for example. Why not? I really don't see any problem with that. When sometimes you hear criticisms of mathematical music, right, or music that is very mathematic. This is something that I heard before. I don't see why is that a problem. Why?
People don't want to think too hard. They don't want to think too hard. It requires more than just sitting back and passively listening to music.
I think that you're right about that, and again, the issue is not being passive per se. The issue is being passive all the time.
Yeah.
That is the issue. Sometimes I want to listen to music passively. I want to enjoy it in the most in the most superficial way. Yeah. I don't have a problem with that. So I need that frame, that mental space, and it helps me.
But again, it comes to diversity.
But it comes with diversity, and more importantly, it comes with the ability to become active subjects in what we do on a daily basis. It comes with being able to listen to music in other ways, to listen to music in ways that that after hearing a piece or during a piece, you will somehow be interacting with that piece. You will be listening to it. You will be thinking, what does this mean? Why did this happen?
Yeah.
How did this thing that happened relates to something that is external to that piece? Mm-hmm. This sort of questions, what they ultimately do is that they help us place ourselves outside of the repetitive logic of consumerism.
Yeah.
And this like very again, I think repetitive is the right word. These very repetitive patterns, phenomenological patterns, like of how to process certain things. And I think that one of the wonderful things about art, and art that attempts to disrupt these patterns, is that it helps us grow, and it helps us be more critical. It helps us, for a glimpse, to stand outside of history, to realize that we are subjects, that we create history. That history is not something that happens to us. We can become active participants. So, unfortunately, that kind of listening is very rare, even within academic contexts. It's rare.
Yeah.
It's rare. It's actually not. It's not common. Yeah.
So for those people who say difficulty, prevents or disrupts creativity, what would you say to that? So if something is difficult, or if it's too hard to learn, you lose all the creative juice that you have.
Oh. No, of course, yeah. I've heard this argument before. The thing is that, speaking of creativity, which is a word that has been used very much by the creative industries, right, and by this sort of, it's cool today to be creative, and it's cool today to be creative because, to some extent, working class people have to be creative under neoliberalism. I mean, like when you have very little jobs, for example, or when you have jobs that are very that pay very little or that don't offer any benefits, you have to be creative. You have to think, what am I going to invest my time in so that I can survive, so that I can make some money? So when people talk about, especially companies talk about being entrepreneurs, right? That's like the word that is very common. What it really means is that it just means that we have to be entrepreneurs because really, like, no one really will help us at all.
Yeah.
And that's very sad, in my opinion. But regarding, like the difficulty and, like how like creativity or the difficulty is something that disrupts creativity, right? I think that it's one of the silliest arguments that I've heard, like, to be honest. And I think it's silly because creativity doesn't exist in a vacuum. Creativity is not something that we just do out of nowhere. Creativity can only be explained in a dialectical relationship with history and with the knowledge that we get from history. That's how you explain creativity. So why is Beethoven creative? That's a question that we should ask ourselves, or any musician, but Beethoven in particular. Why is Beethoven creative? Beethoven is not creative because he just put, I don't know, just like acquired at the end of the symphony. I mean, that is whatever. I mean, it's pretty cool, you know. But really, the creativity doesn't really lie there. I think that the creativity lies in his ability to jeopardize and be critical of the classical style.
Yeah.
It comes with how he will reinterpret and reconstruct sonata form in ways that Haydn and Mozart did not do.
Yeah.
Although they still, did their false recapitulations and things like that. I mean, with Beethoven, suddenly you realize that he will do things that put on the very surface of the discourse. They show you that he is aware of the classical style. That he is aware that he's operating within a tradition.
So knowledge is important.
knowledge is crucial.
Yeah.
Knowledge is crucial. I mean, that's what makes Beethoven creative.
Yeah.
Because he knows the style so well that he's capable of disrupting
Yeah.
the style and generate something new. That's why some people actually, from Adorno, but also like Charles Rosen, and then Michael Spitzer in like a book that I really like, Music as Philosophy, actually. That's why they all argue that Beethoven is both a classical composer and a modern composer. Yeah. And I absolutely agree with that. I absolutely agree. And to that extent, Beethoven has become like a very important composer, a musical figure for me, because I think that he is a great example of how to synthesize historical knowledge and transform it into something that transcends that knowledge.
Yeah.
And it transcends it not just simply by ignoring it, because then you cannot transcend anything, but simply by acting against that knowledge. It is to some extent it's criticism. Yeah. I think that Beethoven is a critical composer of the classical style. So anyway, that was just a parenthesis about Beethoven. But overall, creativity doesn't exist on its own. Creativity exists against history and against previous knowledge. Against or for, or it exists in that dialectical space between that knowledge and what's possible in the future.
Well, this is off from everything we talked about, or sort of connected in many ways, but you've had the European experience, you've had the American experience. How are they different? How are they similar? How can they grow or learn from each other in the way we teach music education, especially at the college level, since you teach at a college now? So
that's right. It's interesting because it is true that I have had both experiences, but the places that I've been to the U.S. have been quite informed by European teaching methods, I would say. Mm-hmm. And also, I have studied with European teachers who were trained in Europe. Not just because they're European, but because they were trained in Europe. So that's interesting. Regarding the differences, it's difficult to say. I personally, I have not experienced much. I haven't experienced many differences. Yeah. I would say that in Europe, perhaps in some parts of Europe and in certain centers of new music, so for example in Darmstadt or in Graz, in Impulse, places, festivals that I've been to, I think that generally there is a more, again, some sort of a more dialectical relationship with the past. Mm-hmm. In the U.S., sometimes this is a little bit lost, and there is a tendency to glorify the free market and to glorify how wonderful it is that we are very unique, when in fact, no, we're not. I mean, it's a very commodified culture, and there is nothing to be proud of, actually. Yeah. But of course, it also depends, because again, while it is true that in Europe you may have this more critical view or connection to the past, I still think that can easily lead to plain conservatism. Yeah. And to plain, like we are conserving a tradition that deserves to be conserved, and that's something that I am not very fond of. Mm-hmm. Forms in general, any kind of conservatism, I'm not very fond of. But in this particular kind, I am not either, because we should ask ourselves what needs to be conserved in any case. Why do we do that? And what do we expect to do in the present and in the future? Mm-hmm. So, for example, when sometimes you will see programs like orchestras or ensembles that they try to rediscover very early composers, and I think that can be interesting. I don't disagree with that per se, but I do think that there is plenty of really interesting music being made today that is powerful, that is connected to multiple traditions in ways that do not just simply reiterate those traditions, mm-hmm. that could be more emphasized, or that could be more disseminated.
Yeah.
So I think that it's important to support musicians today in that sense, and like composers, improvisers, whoever is making music today. I think that's something important too. So I would be, in general, I would be cautious of making distinctions between the U.S. and Europe as if these were monolithic blocks. They're not. They really aren't.
You said about orchestras in general, just such a old way of thinking about the way we program, especially in orchestras. Like you said, sometimes with newer pieces, and new composers are afraid to write for orchestras sometimes because they don't have that luxury of having a few rehearsals with the orchestra, really getting to know the orchestra, trying new things out with the orchestra, explaining to the orchestra and the conductor what they're going after as a composer. So that's something that could be frustrating, and that's something that could be changed, but they're set in their old traditions. At least this is my opinion. They're set in so many ways. We have to have 3 rehearsals, and then we have to have a concert. We have to have 2-hour rehearsals. Why can't we just have a couple of weeks of rehearsals before a new concert or a presentation of a new composer or a new idea? These are all things that could be fixed in ways, but it seems like the orchestra management and conductors in general tend to be afraid of change in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I would actually add that they may not necessarily be afraid of change. It's just that it's very difficult to make that kind of change because there is no investment. Or in other words, orchestras essentially operate as for-profit organizations, especially in the U.S. Now, of course, technically many of them are non-profits. But what I mean by that is that they have to, at the very least, like be even. They have to actually invest a certain amount of money so that they don't lose money. Now, the problem is that we have a socioeconomic system that pushes all institutions, including musical institutions, to operate according to this logic. So, you were saying, and I think that this is a very interesting point, why orchestras have 2-3 rehearsals and then concert, and why not a month of rehearsals and 1 concert? Well, because you need the revenue. Well, because you need that. The way to avoid this sort of issue would be by investing public money. It will be by, and I think about, like 1950s, 1960s Europe, for example, and in Germany and France in particular, where you have composers like Stockhausen who can write a piece like Gruppen. Writing a piece like Gruppen cannot happen in a country that, or let's just put it this way, it's less likely to happen in a country that is not a social democratic country. And it is because you need those resources. You need the time to put 3 orchestras together, essentially. You need the time to put 3 conductors together. You need the time to organize rehearsals in ways that are productive. And you need time, energy, and the money to pay the musicians. So the issue that we have is that because of the privatization of the arts, music, culture, and practically everything at this point, we are also reduced in our artistic and creative possibilities. We have a reduction there. So it's not that I don't think that conductors or musicians are scared. It's just that it's so excruciatingly difficult to do something different. It's just so difficult. Personally, I think that a way to avoid this, as I was saying, is by encouraging, promoting, and demanding public funding of the arts, and demanding forms to fund the arts that are democratic, that are that the money is not just simply allocated to like the same institutions all the time, but actually that it can be disseminated and it can be distributed in ways that both small and large institutions, can benefit. I think that this is more of a model that we could pursue if we wanted to like do other types of projects, because that allows you to not have to focus too much on profit, and being able to survive, at the end of the quarter.
Yeah. So as 21st century artists, we have to be educators. We have to think critically about everything that is surrounding us, including topics like this. In a certain way, we also have to be politicians, or at least be aware of the surrounding to demand the public funding or whatever else that we might want to ask.
We have to be political citizens.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
And not just musicians, and not just boxed up and say, I'm just a composer and I'm just a conductor. We have to just be well-rounded in everything we do.
Correct. And I would even that we were never composers or conductors only.
Yeah.
We were never that. There was a point, both in the U.S. and in Europe, for different reasons. In the U.S. because of New Deal politics, and then Fordism and then Keynesian economics, basically, that generated a fair amount of welfare for a particular class, primarily white people. In Europe, because of social democratic programs, there was a point that we seemed to forget, that we are political citizens.
Yeah.
That somehow we felt that, the sort of Fukuyama neoliberal, end of history argument, really, we believe that to some extent we got it, if everything is fine, and now we just can focus on what we really want to do.
Yeah. And
that was never true. That was an illusion. We always had to be political citizens and active participants in society. It's not that I think that we have to. It's just that we are.
Yeah.
And we can choose to act upon that, or just withdraw and just then become complacent, or I would even go further, complicit in what is happening.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll be more active, because I just hope that the future generations are more active, because now there's a lot of activity on social media, but it doesn't translate to activity in real life and getting out there and talking to people and making changes physically and all the time. That's what I'm hoping to see a lot more of, and that's why this letter was so great, because it went from, just like you said, from Facebook, just we could comment on this, or we could actually step up and make a big action and try to unite people and try to kind of make a difference in what was said. So that's why I love that letter so much, because it really created this unified thing for musicians that should have happened. Well, lastly, before I let you go, so much talk about music. If you have anything to say about some of the things that you do outside of music, your life outside of music.
My life outside of music, yeah. I do a lot of things outside of music, actually. One of the things that I do, for example, is I'm an organizer. I work with an organization here in Chicago, a socialist organization, actually. We, for example, have been fighting for $15 minimum wage in certain areas. Actually, it's funny that you're in Seattle, because in Seattle we have a representative.
That's true.
Who actually did that, or helped to do that.
Yeah.
But also now in Minnesota, we also will try to do this in the East Coast and so on and so forth. So this is actually a priority of our organization, and it's something that has been always important for me. But it wasn't until recently that I decided to really step up, and just move into becoming a more political citizen, I would say, and a more political subject. I have been always concerned about politics. In fact, my dissertation is primarily about politics and music. But I was always skeptical of being part of an organization, because I don't want to lose my independence and my ability to critically assess the organization that I am part of. And this is something that is funny. When I joined the organization, that's what I told one of my colleagues there. I was like, I want to be able to criticize the organization. If I cannot do that, I'm not going to join. Because I think that critique is not something negative. I think that it's the way for us to move forward and to try to find out, okay, what have we done wrong, And so what was wonderful is that once I joined, I realized that most of my colleagues in the organization are like that as well. So there is a lot of internal debate of how things have to be run, of what we want to do. There is true democracy in that sense. There are discussions, they're long, they're boring, they're annoying. But we vote at the end of it, and we try to decide, what the next step is, collectively. So I have learned a lot from that. It's something that I hope to continue to do, forever.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And your dissertation is actually one of the topics I had on my screen. Was music and politics. But we talked about so many other things, we didn't get to that. But maybe we'll talk about your dissertation, because I would love to hear about all of your ideas about that. I forgot to ask you that. It was on my list. I just had such a long list that I just couldn't get to. Anyways, thanks for joining me. It was great talking to you, and you're welcome anytime to talk about whatever you feel and want to talk about, music or not music.
My pleasure. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.